Good evening, Shumana.
Good evening, sir. I sincerely apologize for this delay in joining. So,
No, this is okay. This is okay. You are very busy. Still, you are managing the time for
no,
us.
sir. No,
That
sir.
is
Yeah. Okay. So, I see a lot of our participants have already joined. So, I think we can start then, or
Yeah, I think you can start now.
okay, sir.
But first, I have to adjust.
Yeah, sir.
Yeah,
not able to share actually.
Yeah, now you can share.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I think it is visible now.
Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, this picture actually tells us a lot about the grounded theory, where, literally we talk about how in a particular type of qualitative research, we are able to ground our theory on certain observations. Okay, so grounded theory, the basic, the crux of understanding grounded theory is that when we are saying grounded theory, it means that all the models, the theoretical model, and if you're trying to develop a new theory or something, that is grounded in the observation. Okay, so that's the concept of grounded theory. So I'll start with the basic concepts in grounded theory, what it is and how and what we actually do in grounded theory. How is it how can we apply grounded theory, which are the areas where it is more applicable, the implications, etc. And then I'll discuss the stages in grounded theory, how we can actually conduct a grounded theory research, what are the different steps of doing it, with some examples, of course. So please feel free to ask me questions if you have any. Okay. So this is basically a research method, qualitative research method, that is concerned with the generation of theory, which is grounded in our data. Okay, data means here in this case, it can be some observation, it can be some interview data, it can be any types of data can be considered for grounded theory research that has been systematically collected and analyzed. Okay. So this particular research method was developed in California, USA by Glasser and Strauss. So Glasser and Strauss, these two are very, very important names in grounded theory research, because they were the ones who first developed it. Later on, there were many other people who worked in the area of grounded theory who actually enriched the method, this qualitative method, by their contributions. But Glasser and Strauss were the pioneers who worked in the area of grounded theory. So this one aims to collect data and interpret the data from the textual base. Now, this textual base can be anything. It can be a collection of field notes, video recordings, okay, and many other forms of, bases can be considered for ground theory research. It can be interview, it can be some, anecdotal records, anything can be considered. So after the process of interpreting, the database is categorized into different variables, and then the interrelationship between these variables are analyzed and studied. That's how grounded theory is done in a nutshell. Okay, but of course there are so many different intermediate steps that we need to follow in if we are trying to do a grounded theory research. Okay. features. What are the features? First thing, data collection and analysis occur simultaneously. This is one of those qualitative methods where we keep on analyzing the data as it is coming to us. Okay, I'll show you towards the end. I'll show you a research. Okay, which and I'll discuss the research method which they had followed. You will see that how this collecting data and analyzing the data can occur simultaneously, and what are the intermediate steps that we need to follow if we are doing this two simultaneously. Okay, so categories and analytic codes are developed from the data. Okay, these categories can be including subcategories, okay, using different types of codes like open coding, axial coding. These I hope you can remember that we discussed all this in thematic analysis as well, open coding, axial coding, all this. So these will come in grounded theory research as well. Here also we use those types of codes for coding the data. Then theoretical sampling is used to refine categories. Okay, now theoretical sampling is something which is kind of unique to grounded theory research. So I will discuss what it is and how can we actually do a theoretical sampling in grounded theory research. Then abstract categories are constructed inductively. Okay, so this abstract categories means certain categories based on the coding process that we are doing. These types of categories are developed from the data, and they are constructed inductively, where you will see that inductively means it follows the process of developing a certain kind of hypothesis and then theory building on the basis of some basic observation. So whatever you are observing in the data, on the basis of those observations, you will form some hypothesis, and it leads to the development of certain abstract categories in this case. Okay. Certain social processes are then discovered in the data, how one is related to the other. So these abstract categories which are constructed, in the next step we try to find out the interrelationship among these abstract categories. Okay, so those actually represent the social processes that are there. Then analytical memos are used between coding and writing. So memos are very, very important in grounded theory research. We will discuss extensively what are memos and how can we do memoing. And finally, the categories are integrated into a theoretical framework. So that's how these are those, in a very short manner, we can say that these are some of the steps that we follow or features that we can find in grounded theory research. But of course, the process itself is a very, very extensive one, okay, which we will discuss shortly. Generally, there are two different approaches in grounded theory research. First one is the classic grounded theory, which was proposed by Glasser and Strauss, who did the pioneer works in grounded theory research in developing the method as a whole. The other one is a constructivist grounded theory, which is based on the works of Sharma's. Okay, he was also, this person was also a very, significant person, we can say, in the area of grounded theory research, and he emphasized the role of the researcher in the process of theory development. Okay, while Glasser and Strauss emphasized the discovery of a theory that is grounded in data. Okay, so the two approaches are a little different. So we can compare this in classic grounded theory. The focus is on generating a theory that explains the phenomenon being studied without being influenced by preconceived notions or existing theories, right? On the other hand, in constructivist grounded theory, the focus is on understanding how individuals construct meaning and interpret their experiences rather than on discovering an objective truth. Okay, so here it is having a constructivist approach. Okay, how people are analyzing and interpreting their experiences, that is influencing the development of the theory. Okay. Again, in classic grounded theory, the process involves a continuous cycle of data collection, coding, and analysis with the aim of developing categories and subcategories that are grounded in the data. On the other hand, in constructivist grounded theory, this process involves a reflexive and iterative approach to data collection, coding, and analysis, with the aim of developing categories that are grounded in the data and the researcher's interpretation of the data. Okay, so here also we are following the same method of data collection, coding, etc. But it is not, I mean, it not only includes the observations that you are taking into consideration, but also the researcher's interpretation of the data. That is also of supreme importance in constructivist grounded theory. Finally, in classic grounded theory, the categories and subcategories are compared and synthesized to generate a theory that explains the phenomenon. In constructivist grounded theory, the categories are compared and synthesized to generate a theory that accounts for the multiple perspectives and interpretations of the phenomenon being studied. So the basic difference between these two approaches is that in classic grounded theory, we are concerned with explaining the phenomenon itself. Whatever you are observing, it can be any social phenomenon, anything. Okay, we are trying to understand the phenomenon itself. Okay, but in constructivist grounded theory, we are more concerned about the perspectives and different interpretations of the phenomena that is being studied. So we are not looking at the objective interpretation of the phenomena itself, but we are trying to understand how the phenomena is interpreted or taken into different perspectives by the researcher and others. Okay, so that's the basic difference between these two approaches. Anyway, the classical grounded theory is definitely more popular and is widely used actually in qualitative research. All right. So how do we carry out a grounded theory research? The first thing that is done here is that the area of interest is identified. Which is our area of interest? What are we interested in? That is first identified. Okay. It can be anything, starting with a social phenomena to anything that is personal in nature. It can be something which deals with a with a psychopathology in a clinical setting. Okay, or something that relates to HR, like how the staffs of a hospital are perceived by the patients who are coming to that hospital. So it's also clinical setting, but it is actually dealing with an HR issue. So we have to identify the area of interest first, right? Then it is important to avoid theoretical preconceptions. Okay, what does it mean? Theoretical preconceptions means that we are assuming right at the beginning that, okay, this will lead to this. These types of preconceptions should be avoided. For example, suppose a researcher wants to do a research on how people perceive convicts. Okay, convicts who are released from the prison, how are they perceived by people in general? Okay, when they are being released in the society, they are coming back to the society, how are people reacting to them, whether they are accepted in the society or not, whether they are having they're facing any difficulty in getting a job or not, etc. So suppose the researcher wants to understand this this particular issue. Okay, so here a theoretical preconception can be that they will be perceived negatively. Okay, which is quite natural, of course, in any society that we can consider, around the globe. But in a grounded theory research, such kind of preconceptions should be avoided. The researcher should be more interested into objectively identifying the kind of preconception that exists. Okay, the perception that exists among people. In this case, why do we need to avoid it? Because if the researcher is having such kind of a preconception, then it can lead to maybe the researcher is trying to interview people to understand the phenomena itself. Now it can happen that if the person is having such kind of a theoretical preconception that the convex will be negatively perceived, then the questions which are supposed to be asked in the interview can maybe negatively tainted. Okay, so that will lead to, of course, a bias response. Okay, the researcher's bias will actually affect the outcomes of the research. So that's why it is better to if we can avoid it. Although in practice it becomes very difficult, because of course at the end of the day the researcher is also a human being, and it is very difficult to take care of this kind of subjective bias in such cases. Okay, next, analytical procedures and sampling strategies are then used, and the study is finished when theoretical sampling is reached. We will shortly discuss what a theoretical sampling is. So after the data collection is done, certain analytical procedures and sampling strategies will be used. Okay, so right at the beginning I mentioned that in grounded theory research we do data collection and analysis simultaneously. So it is not these two are not some subsequent steps that we follow. We keep on doing this simultaneously until a theoretical sampling is reached in this case. Okay, so I will shortly explain how it is done. Then data collected may be qualitative or quantitative or a combination of both. Okay, qualitative can be if you are collecting data through interview. Quantitative can be if you are collecting data from certain existing records, okay, which are already there in the form of some quantification. Okay, generally it is qualitative in nature, or it can be a combination of both. Achha. Data collection methods often include in-depth interviews using open-ended questions. Questions can be adjusted as theory emerges. Mostly it happens that as we simultaneously do the analysis here, it happens that the researcher might start working with a set of questions, and then in between might feel that, okay, I need to include some other questions, or I need to include some more sample in this case. So this flexibility is there. So questions can be adjusted as and when required, and the researcher can keep on modifying the research design as long as the theoretical sampling is not reached. Okay, observational methods and focus groups may also be used in this case. I guess you have already attended classes on these two methods, so I'm not going into the details of these two methods. Observational methods can include certain kind of data which can be sometimes quantitative as well in nature. And focus group discussions will be, generally it generates data which is similar to the data obtained from interviews. Okay, so a conversation, a discussion going on among people, and finally we transcribe the data and we use it for memoing and coding in grounded theory research. So data can be collected in any of these forms. Okay, all these are used for grounded theory research. Okay, what is theoretical sampling? I have already mentioned it twice in the previous slides. So this one, Glaser and Strauss in 1967, they described this process of generating theory from data, which includes collecting the data, then coding and analyzing the data. Here, the researcher makes a conscious decision about what further detail they feel needs exploring as the new theory develops. Usually takes place after some initial key concepts or categories have been identified. Means, I've given an example here. You might decide to interview patients about their experience of heart failure, right? So they may talk about systematic errors occurring in the general practice surgery. From this analysis of the data, you may decide to approach or interview general physicians to explore their views on patients' comments. Right. So what we are doing here is that we are starting off with a pre-decided set of works, set of steps that we will be following. That can include, interviewing some people. Okay, and then as we are doing it, okay, and we are trying to develop a new theory based on the basis of the analysis done, we might feel the need of including some other people in the process, interviewing some other people in the process, or maybe obtaining information from some other sources. It can be, checking some records, like might be checking some records, hospital records in this case. Okay, or as in this example, I've mentioned that interviewing some general physicians to understand the patient's comments. Okay, so as long as you feel that for developing this particular theory, you need some more data, okay, you can continue on, improvising your design, research design. So you can be including more people in your, sample. You can include some more questions in your question sets in the while conducting the interviews. You might include some other setting, okay, or some other type of data as well, so to substantiate your theoretical assumptions. So theoretical sampling here is used to produce more data to endorse or refute the categories that have been identified in the previous analysis. So what we are trying to say here is that theoretical sampling is, as I mentioned, that until theoretical sampling is reached, means until you feel that you have substantial amount of data to justify the categories which you have already recognized. Okay, until and unless you reach that state, you continue to improvise your research design, adding more people, adding more other steps, okay, whatever it is, right? So when you reach a state where you feel that, okay, I have enough data to substantiate my hypothesis, my claims, my assumptions, then you stop. Okay, so that's the state of what we call theoretical sampling. Okay. All right. In grounded theory research, we also talk about theoretical sensitivity. Okay. Theoretical sensitivity. Theoretical sensitivity is basically the insight of the researcher. What's the insight? Insight means here that the researcher's understanding of the process itself. Okay, to what extent the researcher understands the research well, or to what extent the researcher understands that what is needed, what is not needed, that part. Okay, so it concerns the researcher being able to give meaning to data, understand what the data says, and being able to separate out what is relevant and what is not. This is theoretical sensitivity. So by being theoretical sensitive and using insight, the researcher is able to develop a theory that is grounded. Grounded means grounded in the data, theoretically dense, okay, and cohesive. Means the categories which you have identified, the variables which you have identified, those are interrelated and giving you a meaningful aspect of whatever phenomena you are trying to study. Okay, so this depends a lot on the researcher's theoretical sensitivity. So it can come from several sources. That includes literature, that is in-depth reading offers a rich understanding of the phenomena being studied. Professional and personal experience that offers an understanding of the events and topics being explored, and the analytic process that allows for insight and understanding of the phenomena. All these are extremely important. So theoretical sensitivity can develop if the researcher focuses on reading or exploring literature prior to conducting the research itself. Okay, so here literature review is of extreme importance. The researcher should be very well read about the phenomena that the person is going to investigate. First thing. Second, the researcher should have good professional and personal experience in this case. Okay, meaning that if the researcher is a seasoned researcher who is an expert in qualitative research, then of course the person will have higher theoretical sensitivity, because the person will be able to understand the events or topics that is being explored. The understanding will be higher. And finally, the analytic process. This is also very, very important, because the analytic process involves several steps. Actually, several steps. You will see that it's a very elaborative process where we need to follow different steps, doing memoing, coding, etc., and then a lot of other things are there in while writing or reporting what we are trying to find. So this analytic process also requires an expertise of the researcher. So if these are there, then we can say that the theoretical sensitivity is high. Okay. Is it clear to everyone? Are you able to follow till here? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Next comes, what is the kind of data that we use? So not only interviews or observations, but anything is data that helps the researcher generating concepts for the emerging theory. And it includes field notes that can come from informal interviews, lectures, seminars, expert group meetings, newspaper articles, etc., internet mail lists, even television shows, conversation with friends, etc. All these can comprise your data in grounded theory research. There are certain types of data. I found that in certain cases, some series of lectures were conducted on a particular topic, and the researcher actually took the opportunity of conducting a grounded theory research on the basis of the lectures which were there, which were delivered on this particular topic, and that helped him to develop some new insight, a theory in that particular area of research. So all these, okay, newspaper articles on a particular topic, maybe it can be anything like violence towards women or something like that, on that particular topic, if you get, definitely we every day we see a lot of news coming out on this particular topic. So any researcher can actually try to conduct a grounded theory research by considering these newspaper articles. Okay, so it can be anything. Data in grounded theory research can be anything, actually. Okay. Now coming to the steps that we follow in grounded theory research. First step, okay, includes is memoing. Memoing is one of the most important steps that we follow. Actually, coding is also a very important step, but coding is dependent on the memoing that we are doing in grounded theory research. Okay, so we will discuss what are memos and how we can conduct a memoing. Okay, so what are these memos? Memos are basically short notes that the researcher writes and prepares. Okay, now what are these kinds of short notes that we are talking about? It is simply the written down connection among incidents, codes, properties, and categories. Okay, whatever we are observing when we are collecting the data, if the researcher is writing it down somewhere, okay, and trying to find the interrelationship among those categories and codes, whatever there are, whichever there are, so that can actually lead to the development of a memo. Okay, so memos are informal logical notes about the data and the theoretical connections between categories. These are informal because these are very much private to the researcher himself or herself. Okay, it's just for the understanding of the researcher. The memos are created. Okay, and it is very much subjective in nature. Okay, if you are conducting a research, you will see that different researchers, they develop different types of memos. Okay, so there is not some standard methods that we follow. Of course, there are certain types of memos that we develop, or there are certain steps that we follow, but the specific memo which we are developing for a particular set of data, that is very much specific to a particular research, or specific to a researcher himself or herself. Okay, there is no standard guideline that we follow for developing memos, because these are just some informal logical notes that the researcher develops. Okay, so these memos act as a source of data, which is further put in other processes of analysis and interpretation. Basic intention of developing a memo is that these help us to understand and interpret the data in a much better way. Okay, so memoing is a continuing activity which builds intellectual assets, fosters analytic momentum, and informs the grounded theory findings. Okay, so it is actually extremely important to do memoing when we are doing a grounded theory research, because it helps us to understand the interconnections that are there in the data which you have collected. Okay, so different styles and structures of memoing. How do we do it? Firstly, there is no specific style that we follow for memoing. It can take any form: informal, formal, conversational. The researcher can use his or her own autonomy of memos to develop research. Okay, Sharma's say, mentioned in 2006, Sharma's mentioned that best way of memorizing is to do what works for you. Whatever works for you as a researcher, however you feel comfortable, you can develop the memo. All right, if you find writing in details, then you write in details. If you find that okay, you can just focus on the interrelationships, then also it is fine. Okay, so there is no standard format, there is no formal process of developing it, or creating a memo. It's just it depends upon the researcher himself or herself, and on his or her comfort level. Okay, so it is not necessary to check even grammatical mistakes of memos. Okay, when you are doing a memo, you need not be concerned about the grammatical mistakes, if you have made any, or whether you have correctly written the language or not. So these are not at all important when we are creating memos. Okay. A memo has no approved structure. It can be long, it can be short. Okay, I will show you some examples so you will understand that how it is actually done. So format of memos actually vary from person to person. It depends upon the person himself or herself. Okay, memos might be anything from a couple of words to several paragraphs or pages. It is not critiqued or evaluated and has no perfection. So you will see, if you go through a grounded theory research that has been conducted, you will see that the researchers, when they are reporting the memos which were developed, you will see that there is no standard format that is followed. Okay, it depends upon the group of researchers who are conducting the grounded theory in this case, okay, who are following this particular method. So it can be long, it can be short, and nobody is concerned about how the memoing has been done, or whether there is any right or wrong about it. Nothing like that. Okay, there is no right or wrong about the memoing that you are doing. No one is in a position to judge whether the memoing which you have done, whether it is correct or it is incorrect. It's like that. Okay. Structure of a memo actually includes 3 different parts: heading, body of the memo, and the attachments. Okay. So the heading actually recognizes who wrote the memo and who it was sent to, the date and the purpose of the memo. Okay. Body provides a description of the purpose, such as important background information with some detail and specific recommended response. And a researcher can also attach any documents in memo under the closing. So these 3 are very distinct parts of the memo that the researcher is developing in this case. Okay, so but at the same time, it is not necessary that you have to follow these structures, because memoing does not include any approved structure or any standard format. It's just for the convenience of the researchers that one follows one tries to understand memo in terms of the heading or the body or the attachment, like that. Okay. How can we then prepare these memos? Okay, we will have to understand that as well. How can we prepare these different memos? So there can be different ways in which memos can be prepared. Firstly, theoretical note. So this form of note contains the details regarding how a textual database is related to the existing literature of the concerned study. Okay, so theoretical notes, actually, it can be a little longer. It can be consisting of 1 to 5 pages, and final theory and report consists of an integration of several such theoretical notes. So the researcher can be writing about these theoretical notes continuously for different parts of the data. Okay, whatever textual base database you have, one can try to relate this database with the existing literature and write theoretical notes about it. So this theoretical notes actually helps us to integrate and develop the theory at a later stage. Okay. Second, field note. So field notes actually consists of the notes prepared when the researcher is actively participating with the population or culture or the community under study. Okay, when the researcher is actually collecting the data, at that point of time, the notes which are taken, those actually constitute the field notes. Okay, it can be observation of behavior, interactions, events, or situations that occur on the spot, and it also contains the causal notes behind such actions. So absolutely depending upon the insight of the researcher himself or herself. So suppose the researcher is interviewing a group of people for his or her research. So while interviewing, the researcher might have some observations, okay, regarding how the people are responding, or the researcher can have some based on the interactions, the researcher can have certain insights about the behavior. Okay, why and how the behavior is taking place, why someone is behaving in a particular way. Okay, whether the person, whatever the person is saying, whether it is something that is explaining his or her behavior or not. So all these can be written down as field notes. Okay, very short notes which help the at a later stage, it will help the researcher to identify and to integrate the data already collected. Okay, so these are the field notes. And finally, code notes. So the researcher or the ground theorist may also prepare notes by naming, labeling, or categorizing things, properties, and events. Okay, these code notes are those notes which discuss the codes of such labeling. These code notes further act as a source of information of final reports, and further, these code notes also act as a guide to the ground theorist while analyzing a text or a case. Okay, so the researcher can also develop certain codes, okay, in terms of labeling or having categories or subcategories. So all these actually help understand and integrate the data that is being collected. Okay, so what are the different types of memo that can be used in this case? Okay, generally in qualitative research, 3 types of memo are used. First one is a research diary. Second is methodological memo. And third one is analytical memo. Let's see what these are. Research diary. So it is a primary memo and it is used for reflections, thinking critically about the research. It also solicits the development of the research that comprises a varied set of data collection instruments and techniques. It clarifies the assumptions, personal responses, decision-making about the research. It is a valuable tool prompting insights which
informed a variety of methodological and theoretical decisions in relation to the research, and it can be used to list and outline a strategic plan for the short-term and long-term development of ideas. So this research diary is also one form of memoing, where the researcher, which actually is helpful to the researcher himself or herself, because this research diary is used for understanding the research itself. So it is like a metadata for the researcher. Okay, so that the researcher can go back and try to critically evaluate whatever is being done, whatever the researcher has already done, all those things. Okay, whether anything new is required or not, whether the assumptions are justified or not, whether the decisions which were made, whether those are fine or not. So all these things are actually enlisted in the research diary in the form of memoing, and it acts like a metadata for the research itself. Okay, so researcher can, at any point of time, the researcher can go back to this research diaries and try to understand the process that has been followed, and whether everything is fine or not, whether any improvisation is required or not. So it helps in conducting the research in a much more systematic way. Okay, so devising strategic plans, if anything new needs to be done, etc. All these decisions are actually taken on the basis of whatever the researcher is including in the research diary. So that's one form of memo. Next is methodological memos. Okay, so methodological memos are used to maintain the empirical value of qualitative research for the development of the conceptual framework, analytical processes, and theoretical approaches. Researchers can elaborate on how they collected data, analyze the data, which coding cycles they used, and how they identified relations between codes. Okay, so this form of memoing actually helps understand the process that has been followed for this particular grounded theory research. Okay, so methodological memos actually are considered for enlisting the steps, the methodological steps that were followed in conducting that particular research. So this is specifically useful in identifying if the methods that has been followed in this case, if it is okay or not, if there are certain improvisations are needed or not. So this includes writing or shortlisting the different steps that are followed in collecting data, in analyzing the data, the type of coding that has been used. Okay, what are the different kinds of assumptions that were taken? All these things are included in the methodological memos. Okay, these are also very important in the grounded while reporting the grounded theory research, because it helps other researchers to understand the specific methodological issues which were followed in a particular grounded theory research. Okay. Achha. Finally, we talk about the third type of memoing. Okay, that is analytical memoing. Okay, so here brief notes are made about the thoughts, ideas, and questions which the researchers realize during the data gathering, coding, and data analysis process. Okay, these are considered as simulation exercises and are comparable to journal entries, lab notebooks, blogs, etc. Naturally, these are written both during and after data collection process. This can be used for expanding the in-depth analysis of the data and going beyond explicit descriptions that provide a strong starting point to develop a draft analysis. So what happens is that when the researcher is actually conducting the research, several types of thoughts, ideas might be coming to the researcher. All right. And these realizations actually help at a later stage because, in one of the descriptions I was going through, a researcher who was conducting grounded theory reported that when the researcher was actually transcribing the data obtained in an interview, the researcher developed certain insights. Okay, so the description was like that. When I started transcribing the interview that I had conducted, it helped me. I was feeling like I was in that situation again. Okay, when I was actually conducting the interview, so I could feel that how the person was responding, what were the different questions that I was asking, what was the next question. So as if I have gone back to the process of the interview itself again. So that's how the researcher actually described her experience of conducting the interview. So that is very important. Okay, so this analytical memoing actually helps us make a note of the thoughts, the realizations that are coming to us while conducting the research, and at a later stage these can be used to understand the process itself. Okay, the specific process that we are following for doing the grounded theory research, that can be done when an analytical memoing is done, because these helps us at a later stage when the researcher is going back to these, going through and just trying to understand the phenomena itself. Such kind of analytical memoing actually helps them to identify that what were the thoughts behind a particular assumption. Okay, so that helps the researcher to recall the experiences, relive the experiences, and finally understand the process itself. Okay, so that's why this type of memoing is also very important. Okay, so what are the uses of memos? Okay, why do we need to develop such kind of memos? The first use here is that it can be used for different specific purposes, like for the research diary, for creating the research diary, as we mentioned. Teamwork memo, how a particular team is working. Idea memo, specific idea which is coming to the researcher while conducting the research itself. Code memo, the ways in which the researcher is coding and is trying to understand the or create categories there. Okay, theory and literature memo, specific type of memos which pertains to the previous literature which is already existing. Research questions memo, specific questions which is coming to the researcher while collecting data. So all these specific requirements can be there for conducting a memo. So memos are basically, as we mentioned, that it's a very informal way of keeping a note of whatever is happening during the data collection process, right? So that's why it can include all these different things, how or why the researcher is conducting a research. Okay, what is happening while conducting the research, Okay, any specific observation about it, everything, whatever it is coming to the researcher can take that into consideration and write a memo about it. Okay, so these are also based on coded data that can be used by both the novice and experienced researcher as a procedural and analytical strategy throughout the research process. It is not needed that the researcher has to be an experienced one for developing the memos, since memos are very, very informal ways of developing or writing about a concept. The researcher can very easily write a memo and start working on it. And this researcher can be anyone, starting from an experienced person to a very novice person who is conducting the grounded theory research first time. Anyone can actually do a memoing, and that can be extremely helpful in this case. Okay. Now, memo writing itself. Okay, how can we actually write the memo itself? So, memos actually make comparisons. Okay, comparisons among the data, the codes, categories, etc. And it's a descriptive record of analytical discussion between the researcher and the data. That's how it is described. Meaning that whatever the researcher is perceiving, how the researcher is perceiving the data or interpreting the data, that is represented through memos. Okay. So it happens when coding and continuous comparison is done to identify possible patterns within the codes. Okay. And it's an intermediate step between coding and writing the first draft of a manuscript. So if you can remember, in our last class also, we were, I was telling you that coding is something which can also be done simultaneously during the data collection process. So those who are very, very seasoned qualitative researchers, they can actually, whenever they are collecting data, they can start doing the coding, okay, and use it in a variety of other processes, like for developing the memos, for modifying the research itself. So memoing is actually a way of making some informal notes once the coding is done. So coding basically talks about labeling or creating categories and subcategories in the data. Okay. And memoing talks about making small notes about it. All right. So it can be written when a researcher decides to combine or split codes, when he or she wants to write conceptual notes about how the codes tell the storyline, or the context in which a certain code could be applied. Okay, so these are, it's like notes of the researcher to himself or herself about the codes which are made, okay, which are developed in that case. Okay. During the coding, memos can be written to identify possible patterns in and between the codes. Remember, we were discussing about open coding, axial coding, selective coding, etc. So the ways in which we are coding the data, there also, we can make short notes about how we are coding the data, or why we are coding the data, how it is important, okay, whether we need certain other things to do in while doing the coding or not. So everything, all these steps can actually substituted by writing memos about it. So it helps the researcher to understand the process itself. Okay.
So the purpose of memo writing is for observing how the coding process and code choices are taking shape in the research. Okay, because finally our objective here is to construct a theory, right, which is an interrelated system of codes. Okay, so it is very important that when we are doing the coding, at the same time, we should be making some metadata. We should be, keeping a record of the metadata. Metadata here means the interrelationship among those codes, how we are interpreting it, how we are associating one code with the other. Okay, what is the underlying thought about it? If there is any previous literature which suggests that there is an association between those codes, and some particular assumptions that we have. So anything that is leading us to do or to develop an interrelated system of coding will require our memo writing. Okay, so memo writing is a note of the researcher to himself or herself, but at the same time, it is an extremely scientific process, because later on, when you go back and check why you tried to associate one code with the other, these memos will actually help you to, understand it, why you did it. Okay, so that's why memo writing is very important, and how we actually do it, when we actually do it, right? So there are some certain stages of memo writing. I hope all of you are able to follow this, right? Are you all with me, able to follow whatever we are discussing?
Yes, ma'am, but I have a question, ma'am. May I?
Yes, sure.
Ma'am, is it the grounded theory, total grounded theory we can write in the memo writing format?
No, memo writing is one of the steps that we follow, one of the very important steps that we follow in grounded theory research. Because in grounded theory research, the entire construction of the theory is dependent on the memoing that we are doing.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah. I'll show you the study design of a grounded theory that is conducted by another group of researchers, and I'll explain how memoing plays a very important role in developing grounded theories. Okay, so the first stage is what we call initial memos. Okay, these capture the exploration and development of qualitative codes and provide direction for future data collection. So initial memos are written to identify the initial thoughts about the obtained data, right? So when you are collecting data, it can be anything. It's like transcribing. It can be transcribing an interview, or it can be taking an observation into consideration. It can be taking, some field notes, some textual data, some, newspaper article, whatever you are considering. What are your initial thoughts about it? Okay, how are you developing the codes in this from this data? So initial memos actually talk about these, and it helps us to identify the direction for future data collection. So maybe when a researcher is conducting a research, the researcher might feel, at the initial stage, might feel that, okay, in the probably in the next stage, I will need to collect data from some other group of people as well. So this thought should be included in the initial memo. Okay, so these are used to acquire knowledge and ideas during the exploration of participant perspectives. Researchers can use initial memoing during open coding to help conceptualize incidents, and then follow theoretical memoing to transfer between substantive codes and theoretical codes. So open coding, if you can remember, in our last class we were discussing that when we are doing coding, we start with open coding and then we go for some other types of coding like axial coding, the selective coding or focus coding like that. So initial memos can be created when we are actually trying to do the open coding process. Okay, right at the beginning of your research, when you are trying to understand the obtained data, you are just exploring the relationships which are there, and you are trying to understand if you need to collect more data or not, which are the areas which are which you need to explore further in your research, if there is any gap in the data that you have collected. So all these can be found in the initial memos created by the researcher. Okay. Next comes the advanced memos. These memos actually identify, trace, and describe the supporting assumptions, emerging changes, practical applications of categories throughout the data analysis. Okay, so once the initial memos are done, as you are moving towards the further levels of coding, there we use the advanced memos, okay, which helps us to identify, trace, and describe the supporting assumptions. Whatever we are assuming, suppose the researcher is assuming that, okay, variable A, there are 5 variables which are emerging from the collected data, and variable A is connected to variable C, variable B is connected to variable D, and variable E is connected to variable D. Maybe these 3 assumptions are something that the researcher is making. Now, how do you justify? What are the supporting assumptions, data that you are getting for your assumptions? So these will come under the advanced memos. Okay, so these advanced memos, they talk about the justifications that you are making for your assumptions, any change that you are able to identify at a later stage, and also the categories which you have developed, whether there is any practical applications of those categories in the data or not. Okay, so these are used to provide a space to freely write reflective thoughts. Reflective thought means whatever the reflections that are emerging from going through the data. When the researcher is going through the data, reading it again and again, trying to understand and code, then certain reflective thoughts can come up. Some reflections from the data itself will emerge. Okay, so the researcher can be making notes about these reflections. Okay, can be ask and answer questions. Okay, can identify gaps in the data. All this will come under the advanced memos. Okay. Finally, integrated memos. With these memos, the researcher begins to integrate codes, categories, and prior memos to enhance the theory development. This is a third stage of memo writing, where we are now concerned about how to integrate the code. So you have already developed the open codes, then you have developed, maybe identified some axial codes, okay, or some focused codes you have already identified. Then you are trying to integrate these codes and categories and trying to develop certain relationships among the categories which you have identified. There we do the integrated memos. So these are used to provide a space for theory abstraction and integration through drawings and discussions. So here we try to understand the specific interconnections among the codes, categories, which actually leads to the theory development part. Okay, and this can be done using some drawings, some discussions, okay, how you are trying to, basically an integration of whatever you have observed and coded in your data. So these are the 3 different stages of memo writing in grounded theory. Clear? So importance of memoing. Why, what are the different uses we can say? It can facilitate research teams. Okay, generally grounded theories are conducted in teams, because it's a very, very extensive process. It can, I'm just giving a lecture in a 2 hours duration, okay, with some slides, but it is, if you try to do it hands-on, it's a very, very extensive process that you will have to follow. So therefore, it is very difficult for a single researcher to do and conduct a grounded theory research, because this memoing is actually a very extensive and elaborate process. Okay, so this can facilitate research teams, because when a researcher is actually collecting data and doing memoing simultaneously, another researcher in the same team, for that person, when he or she is taking a look into the collected data and the memos which are collected, which are created from the data, it will be easier for him or her to understand what the other, or how the other researcher has interpreted the data. Okay, so if people are working in research teams, it becomes easier if memos are created. Otherwise, it becomes a very, one-man process. Okay, so one single individual is, conducting the process, and only he or she knows how the data has been interpreted. But generally, this types of theory building is an extensive process, and therefore, memoing actually helps all the members to understand what has been observed and how it has been interpreted. Okay, so that's why it facilitates research teams. Memo assists both the new and experienced researchers in making conceptual leaps from raw data to those abstractions that explain research phenomena. So what is happening here is that it's like a magical journey. You are just interviewing a group of people, or observing a group of people, or considering some newspaper articles, and you are developing a theory. Okay, and this theory is not just some assumptions. It's a very well-designed, systematically developed, cohesive, grounded theory you are developing. So how is it being possible? Right. So these are actually made possible using memos. So any new researcher, a very a young person having no prior training, or an experienced researcher, whoever it is, can develop a grounded theory on the basis of these memos. Okay, by the use of memos, the researcher can capture the collected data, can explore the meanings of the data holds, and also continuously maintain the freshness to conduct research. Okay, so whatever the steps that are being followed, new steps are being followed. The method is being continuously modified, improvised. In this case, everything can be understood if the memo writing is done properly. Without proper memoing, grounded theory researches will be substandard. It is very important that I will show you that if you are doing a grounded theory research and you want to publish it, you will have to mandatorily submit the memoing that you have done. Otherwise, the journals will not accept your research, because it will be considered substandard. If you are conducting a grounded theory research, if you're claiming that I'm conducting a grounded theory research, it is mandatory to do memo writing, and this memo writing should be properly reported when you are trying to publish it. Okay, so some examples I'll show you. Memo on a short excerpt, like interviewer is asking, what did you do before coming to Canada? Did you work? That's the question. Now, Laura is the interviewee in this case. Okay, so that's the transcription. No, women in our town did not work. Only those who really needed the money had their wives go out and work, or if they were widows. Otherwise, Nobody outside worked outside the home. I had a brother-in-law who was from Abruzzi, who used to say that in my hometown, the women were all eaters of sweets. Within bracket, meaning did not work. That's the transcription. Now, the memo that has been created on the basis of this transcription states, Laura explains how women's work outside the home, within quotation, indicates a family's economic need. Women's paid work is taken as a social marker of low class and status. When women are not forced by necessity to do paid work, it indicates that the family is well-to-do. Laura's brother-in-law's term, eaters of sweets, suggests that standards of living in her hometown are high because families can afford women to stay home and also to eat sweets. Here, the housewife is associated with luxury goods. Housewives, therefore, confer positive status on family. Note also that neither Laura nor her brother-in-law consider housework as work, within quotation, may explore how such a perception of the housewife contributes to women's personal identity. Right. So this first part that we are reading, starting from Laura explains how women's work, till confer positive status on family, this part actually talks about the researchers' understanding of this part of the transcription. Okay, of the transcript. So this is basic. It's like a researcher's note to himself or herself about how the researcher has perceived this Laura, or this interviewee Laura, or her brother-in-law. The next part, note also that neither Laura, this part is actually talking about the methodological aspects. Okay, so this is something that the researcher thinks that it needs to be explored further. Okay, so it's like an insight. It's like a reflective thought that has come to the researcher while writing this memo. Okay, that neither Laura nor her brother-in-law consider housework as work. So this question here did not consider this. It did not ask the interviewee that whether do you consider housework work as work or not. So the question did not concerned about this part, this particular issue. Okay, whether housework is work or not, but it's like a reflective thought that has come to the researcher while doing the memoing. So that's why the researcher has left a particular note to himself or herself as well, that this part needs to be explored further. That how such a perception of the housewife contributes to women's personal identity. This can be explored later on. Okay, so this is how memoing can be done. Another example, memoing on a long excerpt. Okay, so another question is asked here. Okay, as you can see, it asks that. Okay, what was your occupation before marriage, after marriage? Okay. Now Laura is responding, I did not work before I got married. Once the war broke out, Italy was fighting against Canada, My husband said that I should get a job. At that time, he was working at a place that made automobile engines. He made blueprints. They made a car a day there. I worked at the post office too, eventually. Every day of my life, I woke up at 6 a.m., I went to church, then come home and wash and get the kids ready for school. My husband used to get up at 9 a.m. I would bring him coffee in bed and then he would get up. I made my husband's lunch in the morning. He did not want me to make his lunch at night and leave it in the fridge. I made his lunch and his morning coffee. He would come downstairs, grabbed his suitcase, and leave for work in his car. My day ended at midnight or 1 in the morning. My husband had a car since 1929. There were very few cars back then. He took 4 men to work with him. They each gave him $1 a week for gas. On Sundays, I would wake up early in the morning, cook and pack the lunch, and we went on a picnic every Sunday in the summer. There were 7 or 8 families who did this together with us. We all brought food and we all ate together. Those were good times. It does not happen that way anymore. Now, it's a long excerpt that you are getting for a particular question asked. Okay, so the memoing here is done in this way. Here is an example of a husband deciding whether a wife should work. Laura talks about her detailed routine of reproductive labor for husband and children, particularly personal service for her husband. She juxtaposes his schedule against her long hours of work. His needs and preferences determine her work routine. Within bracket, example, not wanting her to prepare his lunch the night before, coffee in bed. These are the, you just note that these are the justifications that the researcher is providing for the assumption. Assumption that his needs and preferences determine her work routine. So this part is the assumption, and the example that is written within the bracket, that is the justification. It's part of the initial memoing that is done here. Okay, so this gives content and meanings to work within quotations in the domestic sphere. Note that now this part is the reflective thought that we are seeing. Note that Laura says nothing about her own post office work. In contrast to the details about reproductive labor, her paid employment doesn't seem to matter much. What does this mean to the formation of her identity? So this is one research question raised on the basis of this memoing done. Okay. In contrast, notice how she stresses the importance of her husband's work, within bracket, making blueprints for a car a day. That's the justification for her assumption, for this assumption. Okay, and his class status. Okay, so class status, that is also another assumption, and the justification is having a car in 1929, driving employees and taking gas money from them, etc. Her work to prepare family picnic unites her family with her Italian families on a weekly basis. Depending on who these families are, the weekly picnic could function to strengthen the family's class affiliation. Okay, so this second paragraph that you are seeing in the memo, that talks about the reflective thoughts that the researcher is having, further research questions that are being raised on the basis of the previous memo, the initial memoing that has been done. And also it includes certain justifications, which substantiates the assumptions made in the memoing. Okay, so that's how a memo can be written. Okay, I hope this part is clear to everyone. Any question? All right. Okay, so once the memos are prepared, so I hope this extensive discussion on how the memos are prepared, that is clear to everyone, because memoing is one of the most crucial steps that we follow in grounded theory research. So once the memos are prepared, the collected information or the data is sorted in order to organize them in proper order. Okay, what is this sorting? This sorting actually helps in putting all the data in proper order, which leads to proper linkage of information and ideas. How each of these memos are coming one by one, and how we can link them, how we can associate one part of the information or idea with the other. The researcher may also get an insight of some more relevant information and ideas which are not revealed during the preparation of memos. So once the sorting is done, it can lead to further ideas and informations. Okay, as we know that when the whole is actually more than the part that we already know. So these memos actually constitute the parts in the interpretation. When it is all integrated as whole, we get even more insights and ideas about how each of these are interrelated and how these leads to the theory that we are trying to construct here. Okay. Coding, this part again I will mention here, although this part we have already discussed in our previous class, that how coding is done in the grounded theory approach. So here also we follow open coding, axial coding, and selective coding. So open coding involves a line-by-line coding where concepts and key phrases are identified and highlighted and moved into subcategories, then categories. Okay, axial coding is where relationships are identified between the categories and connections are identified. In selective coding, it involves identifying the core category and methodically relating it to other categories. Relationships must be authenticated and categories refined. Categories are then integrated together and grounded theory is identified. We need to note here that this process is different from whatever process that we follow in thematic analysis, right? That we had discussed in the previous class. In thematic analysis also we use open coding, axial coding, selective coding, etc. But the process is different because there we develop themes on the basis of these codings, right? Here we do not develop themes. Here we code, and on the basis of this, while developing these codes, we write memos. Okay, and then these codes, once the selective codes are done, also known as focus coding is done, we directly focus on constructing a grounded theory based on the categories identified. Okay, so here analytical notes are also encouraged. Analytical notes are like notes which are to oneself, the researcher himself or herself, to explain the thought patterns in relation to the data analysis. While you are developing the coding, okay, these notes, these analytical notes will actually help one to explain the different thought patterns. Okay, how the integration is being done, what is the interpretation, why the researcher thinks that this is the interpretation, all those things. Okay, and final theory is usually generated from the integration of several analytical memos. Once all these notes are created, the memos are created, the final theory is generated by the integration of these different memos taken together. Okay. What is this core category? Core category is the chief phenomena around which the categories are built. So in grounded theory approach, once the codes are all, selective coding is done, okay, core category is identified. What is the core category in a particular theory? Why? Because the core category actually talks about the chief phenomena which is happening within the theory. Once the core category is identified, it becomes easier for us to develop the theory, because then the related subcategories are also identified, and the relationships among these categories and subcategories are identified, and the theory is generated. Okay, so this core category should account for the variation found in the data, that is, the categories will relate to it in some way. The categories demonstrate how the core category is situated in the lives of those participating in the study. So this core category and the other categories should be very well connected and should demonstrate, or try to, explain how and why a particular phenomena is happening in the lives of those participants. Clear? Okay, writing in grounded theory. How can we write? Okay, once the memos are all sorted, the next stage is towards the preparation of the theory itself. Okay, when the grounded theorist is actually arranging, relating, and putting all the collected information into words. This is very important because this is like the final reporting of the theory itself. Once the data is collected, memos are written, codes are created, then the memos are sorted. Then the last stage here is reporting it. Once the integration is done among all this information obtained, the researcher or the ground theorist then tries to integrate everything into words. So in this particular step, the researcher tries to give a shape as well as a meaning to the relevant data. Okay, trying to explain why something has happened, how it has happened, what are the causal factors, if any. All these are integrated together. So this may be said to be a very crucial stage, as it is this stage in which the researcher interprets the information on the basis of his or her own perspectives. Okay, for the development of the theory itself. So the collected information is also linked with the existing relevant literature in order to put the theory in a scholarly context. So as I mentioned, that the grounded theory should be related to the previous literature. It should be well grounded to the data collected. It should be very cohesive in its approach, while explaining the relationship among the different categories and codes identified. So all these are done in this final stage of writing the grounded theory. So we cannot just, mention that, all right, these are the codes and these are just connected to each other, and okay, let's be done with it. So it's not like that. In this final stage, you have to integrate everything, all the information that you have collected, integrate it with the relevant literature, so as to obtain a theory which is well grounded, substantiated, and which is cohesive in nature. Okay, so relevance of the grounded theory: the data or the information collected and the theory generated with the help of grounded theory is significant because the ground theorists prepare report on the basis of information collected with the help of various sources, which increases the chance of reliability and validity of the theory. This is very important because, as I mentioned, that in grounded theory, the sources of data can be several, and the researcher can include several sources together. It is not like that, you have to include only one type of data in your research. You can include multiple types of data sources in your research just to substantiate the assumptions which you are making. And since we are doing it in a very objective manner, what happens is that finally the theory which is developed, it is a very very consistent and accurate theory that is developed because the sources of data are several. Okay, the ground theory approach gives an opportunity for exploring the facts and analyzing the causal reasons behind those facts. Okay, so it helps us to explain the causality of a particular phenomena. It is an inductive type of research which has its basis or is grounded on the base of observations and data collected. So it is not just some random assumptions that you are making, but it's a very, systematically done inductive research that you are doing, which helps you to develop a theory which is well grounded in the obtained data. Then the grounded theory approach also provides a base to specify how a knowledge base should be changed in the light of new information. Since the process of conducting grounded theory is very, very flexible, it always, helps the researcher to improvise the knowledge base that is created. Okay. The grounded theory data often categorizes data, which further forms a basis for organizing and reporting results. Okay. So finally, the applications of grounded theory, it is often used in formulation of policies and program evaluation research, since it can be more effectively, it can help in solving the unanswered questions. Okay, so if several policies, if the policy implementation is properly done or not, such kind of researches can be conducted using the grounded theory approach. It can also be used to analyze the consumers' demands and preferences in the existing market. So in marketing research also, grounded theory approach is very, very helpful. It can also be used to analyze product positioning and advertising opportunities. It is one of the best theoretical approaches that can be used in the field of education, management, women's studies, information studies, politics and communities, etc. It helps in understanding, analyzing, and describing human psychology and experience. So the applications of grounded theory is actually multifaceted in different disciplines of social science and humanities research. One can use grounded theory to understand policies, social processes, phenomena, human behavior, underlying psychology, particular social events that are taking place, acceptability of the society in certain cases, everything, any area of research, any issue that is included in this different areas of research can be investigated using the grounded theory approach. Okay, so the application of grounded theory is actually vast, and it is also very much flexible. So you can use any sort of data source for your grounded theory approach. So that's again makes it hugely applicable in different situations. Here, so I'll show you an example here, and I'll end my lecture today with this example here. So this particular research was conducted by Barani, Carter, Evans et al. In 2011, and they used the grounded theory methodology to investigate social processes in private dental practices in New South Wales, Australia. Okay, so at the initial stage, they developed some research questions like, what was the process of implementing or not implementing the protocols from the perspective of dentists, practice staff, and patients? So you see again, evaluation of a policy or a protocol that has been developed. Maybe some government protocol or some policy protocols are there. So whether the process of implementing or not implementing, how it worked in a private dental practice in Australia. So this particular research concerned this. Okay, this particular research. And second research question was that, how did this process vary? Okay, how it varied among the dentists, practice staffs, and patients, etc. Okay, and they wanted to understand this research problem from the perspectives of these three different types of people: dentists, practice staffs, and patients. So this was the methodology followed in their research. You see how it worked. So it in stage A, an open beginning and research question. So at the very early stage, they framed the research questions in this case okay, on the basis of certain literature review and all. So the research questions were framed. In the second stage, ethical approval was obtained since they wanted to work in the clinical setup with hospital staffs and patients and policy implementation. Ethical approval is very important in this case. So they obtained the ethical approval in this case. Then in the third stage, they did an initial purposive sampling. So this purposive sampling included interviewing dentists and practice staffs and some patients. Okay, now you see at this particular stage, stage C, initial purposive sampling is when it is being done, how it worked, how they worked in this particular stage. Firstly, they interviewed one dentist and 5 practice staff. So they were purposively chosen for these interviews, and it included, this interview phase included interviewing only one dentist and 5 practice staffs. Memo writing was done after each interview. This was the initial memo that was developed. And they also interviewed 12 patients, okay, in this case, 5 of which were unreliable in this case. So that also, they also kept a note of this particular fact. Okay. Then in the next stage, they did data analysis by doing coding and memo writing. Okay. So this coding and memo writing were done in the next stage, and they identified that there were some gaps. They needed to, improvise their approach. So they improvised it. Okay. Then again, they had to obtain the ethical approval. Why? Because once the study design is improvised in this case, they have mentioned that also, alteration in both dentists or practice staff and patients interview questions routes. So they made some modifications in the set of questions which were used for the interviews. So again, they had to obtain the ethical approval for this case. Right? Then after the ethical approval was obtained, they moved on to the next stage where they wanted to, reach the state of theoretical sampling. Remember that, how we describe theoretical sampling, meaning that they kept on repeating and modifying the question sets and the, other settings and, including more people until and unless the entire theory construction process was substantially justified. Okay, so how did it follow? In the first step, they interviewed some more dentists. So in the initial stage, they interviewed only one dentist and 5 practice staffs. In this particular stage, they interviewed 3 dentists and 5 practice staffs. Okay, memo writing was done after each interview. Again, they repeated this stage D and E. Means after this memo writing was done, they again did a coding and memo writing. Then they went for ethical approval. Then again, they repeated the process of theoretical sampling in this case, and went for ethical approval, returning for interviews in this stage. After this stage, they went for further modifications where they interviewed 1 dentist, 2 therapists or hygienists, 1 manager, 6 practice staffs. So you see how they kept on improvising their design as and when the process was being followed. Memo writing was done after each interview, and at each stage they had to obtain ethical approval for the modification done in the research. Okay, this kept on happening. Again, they repeated D and E, that is doing the coding and memo writing, and then again identifying the gap that is there. So in the next stage, they went for interviewing 3 reliable patients. Okay, further 3 reliable patients were interviewed. Memo writing was done. Again, they did a coding and analysis and tried to look for the gaps in the research. In the next stage, they interviewed 2 unreliable patients. Okay, then again, memo writing was done. Okay, and then again, coding and analysis was done, and the research gap was identified. All these things kept on repeating, continuously repeated until the theoretical sampling was reached. After this, they included some more interviews, including dentists from both arms of previous MPP studied, means other previous studies, how it happened. That also they included in this in their own research. So they interviewed one dentist who was an owner and in a control group. They interviewed another dentist who was an employee and in the control group. Then again, one dentist owner and in the control group. Then again, another dentist and employee and in the control group. Then another dentist who is an owner and in the intervention group, and one dentist who is an employee and in the intervention group. And after each interview, they did a memo writing, then did a coding and analysis of the same. Finally, after they reached the theoretical sampling here, they did a mapping of the concepts. Theoretical memo writing was done, and further refining of the concepts happened after this. Okay, so I'll share this research with you all, and if you can just go through the research in details, you will see that how each of these steps were elaborately discussed in the paper. If you are planning to do a ground theory research and if you are planning to publish it, you have to specifically mention elaborately each of these steps which you are following. See, that's the difference between qualitative study and quantitative study. In quantitative study, we do not bother about all those specific data processes, every single change that we are making. Okay, you just have to mention the method, okay, in details, and the after the analysis is done, what you are getting out of it. Nobody will ask you that if you have collected 500 data, what each of those data talked about. Nobody is bothered about it. But in a qualitative research, since the chances of having a subjective bias is higher, that's why you need to mention elaborately each and every step which you have followed. Okay, so you see that it's an entire process in which the grounded theory was done. Okay, this research was done and they developed a theory based on this. So you see, how many times they had to modify the design until the theoretical sampling was reached. Okay, and at each stage they had to do a memo writing. Okay, memo writing which will help them to identify further research questions, further gaps in the research. So they kept on adding more and more people in their sampling process, more and more different steps. Okay, and finally, when they found that okay, theoretical sampling is done, the gaps are all filled up, then they went for mapping the concepts. Then theoretical memo writing, where they tried to in theoretical memo writing, where they are relating the existing information with the previous literature and further refining of the concepts for the development of the theory itself. Okay, so that's the entire process, okay, which they followed. These are some examples of the memo writing that they did from their interviews. So the first one is a memo written after interviewing a practice manager. Okay, so the first part here, it talks about the transcription. This was quite an eye-opening interview in the sense, etc., etc. And then the memo based on the transcription that was there. Okay, so these are the examples of the memos which were written after the interviews were conducted. The second part, this believing plus embracing plus developing is equal to adapting question mark. This one talks about the conceptual understanding of the initial memos. Right. So the upper portion talks about the initial memo. Okay, initial thoughts of the researcher about the interviews. In the second part, it's more of an advanced memo that the researcher has developed. So it talked about the reflective thoughts, the gaps which can be reassessed later on. Okay, if there is anything which is leading to some assumptions, okay, which can be used in the theory development, all those things are included in the second part of the memo writing. Okay, so that's how we are writing memo, and these memos, how they help us develop or construct theories in grounded theory approach. All right, so I'll stop my lecture here, and everyone for your patient listening. Okay, so we are now open for questions. If you have any question, please feel free to ask. Yeah. If there is any question, please, you can unmute yourself and you can ask. Or you can write it down in the chat box as well. It's fine.
Students, is there anyone who has any doubts or questions?
I think they will practice, and after that they can realize. Seems to be. For that reason, they are maybe waiting.
Yes, actually, the grounded theory approach is a very extensive approach, I would say. So it will require some reading, and of course, going through the process itself in details. Just maybe just listening to a lecture is fine, but the students, they need to go through it themselves. Then only they will be able to understand the process itself and frame questions if they have any. So yeah.
Actually, now they have understood the theoretical sampling, memoing process. So these things are very important. And now you can understand the coding and memoing, how they are related and how they are different also, and how the final phenomena that is explored through the memoing process. And specifically, how to control the error. So Madam has told you that is collection of the data following different type of designs and more number of people. And finally, this example about the dentist issue, that is very interesting. So dear students, if you have any question or anything to share, you can ask. I think they will follow your lecture. After that, they will contribute maybe. Maybe that is.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Students,
fine.
in case even later on you have any doubts, let them like, pass it on to us. We'll have them answered through ma'am as well.
So Shara, please give the vote of thanks.
Yes, sir. Ma'am, just like the last lecture, we've usually heard about grounded theory and the theoretical basis of it, the understanding, but your session was more of a one-on-one, like how to actually conduct a grounded theory and not just the theoretical understanding per se. Every single step you have so extensively explained, and I'm pretty sure the students possibly might be feeling a little, there's so much to understand, because of which they are taking time to process it. But definitely it has been a very helpful session, and looking forward to many more sessions with you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for this amazing session with our students. Looking forward to more sessions with you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, sir. Thanks to all the participants for being patient and taking this time. So I really hope that this lecture helps you all. And in future, if you are doing grounded theory in your research, this particular lecture will help you understand the process itself. So, okay, so thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks again, sir. So I'll take your leave. Good night,
Yes,
everyone.
I'm requesting all of you, please close your hands for the prayer. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purna Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadayo Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you, Shuvana.
My pleasure, sir.
It's a just precious moment we have spent with you, and we have learned many things from you through these consecutive lectures. We have learned many things, and our students are very much happy for your lecture. Okay,
Thank you,
so
sir.
I'm closing now. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.